Hello, Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun, and joining me today, all the way from the Texas 2nd Congressional District, Dan Crenshaw, Congressman, Republican rising star. Welcome to Never Mind The Ballots. Congressman, 3 years ago when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, it was a brutal, illegal act of aggression. Yet the president now is treating it like two equal parties that can be mediated against. Is he getting that wrong?
I'm not sure I agree with the premise. You know, I remember when when Putin first invaded, I think he heard some pretty strong words from Trump. I remember when Putin threatened to invade, back when Trump was his first term. I remember his exact words, I'm paraphrasing, but I believe he said something along the lines of, "I'll bomb the shit out of Moscow if you do that." It was Trump who changed Ukraine aid from, basically humanitarian support to actual weapons, which of course ended up saving Kyiv from actual takeover, Stingers and Javelins to be precise. None of that came until the Trump administration. So Trump's strategy, you have to understand how he thinks and how he negotiates. He will use kind words in order to get somebody to the table. And what hasn't worked is not talking to Putin for the last 2 years, and which Biden has not done. And then, slow rolling this aid to Ukraine. And we're in a very unique situation right now, which I think President Trump is taking advantage of, which is you finally got an escalation from Biden at the very end of his administration, allowing weapons to be used inside Russia. Ukrainians have taken Russian territory, which they now hold. That induces additional leverage, and that leadership has also increased slightly Europeans' ability or willingness to also allow their weapons to be used inside Russia and more weapons to be delivered. You add additional sanctions on top of that, which President Trump is always ready to use, a lot more than his predecessor, and you've got a better place for negotiation. How now that negotiation plays out, that's what everybody's question is, and I have no idea.
How's it going so far, though? Because it seems to me that the ruling out NATO membership straight off the bat, telling the Ukrainians that they're going to have to surrender land, and Rubio today saying that sanctions will be lifted eventually. What's left on the table to negotiate? It doesn't seem to me that there's much of a punishment for the man that started this war.
Well, the White House rolled back a lot of those comments. I think people have been saying different things, and then J.D. Vance was very specific day before his main speech at the security conference, where he said, "We're not leaving anything off the table, anything." Saying sanctions might be rolled back eventually, that's saying nothing. I mean, eventually, sure, if the Russians do what we want. Now we have to figure out what it is we want them to do, and we is also the Ukrainians. Yeah. And there's a lot being said in the media right now that Ukraine doesn't have a space at the table here. That's just not true. That's not the administration's policy. That's not what we heard from General Kellogg at the Munich Security Conference. I was there at that lunch. Yeah. He was very clear that Ukrainians have a place at the table. This is how this is going to go, and I think there's a lot of hand wringing that no one from Ukraine or the EU was in Riyadh. But I'm not sure how else you would do it. This is the strategy. You talk to one side, you get what they want to say. Okay, now you talk to the other side. How do you feel about this? And this is going to be an ongoing conversation. Where it ends up, no one is sure. The Russians are, of course, starting out with pretty outlandish demands.
Trump's making some pretty outlandish demands himself, asking for 50% of Ukrainians' minerals in perpetuity. That's a big ask. That's more than the Germans were coughed up after World War I at Versailles.
I've talked to the Ukrainians about that. All they want is security assurances. So if they get a security assurances, this is not an outlandish demand at all. And in fact, there's a lot of positivity surrounding it, because if you're talking about an American partnership over mineral rights in Ukraine, what are you really talking about? You're talking about an actual integration of the economy, which involves security, which involves a massive amount of actual security guarantees. So this is the best thing. This should be the best news for Ukrainians possible. After I met with Zelensky, and they brought this up, and the Ukrainians don't have a lot of heartburn about this idea. What Ukrainians care about most of all, which what they should care about, is security guarantees. And this is why also, I finally, the Europeans, and this is my understanding of the meeting yesterday in Paris, finally talking about doing more than just, okay, you can talk about increasing defense spending all day long, but until you're taking some action that might actually scare the Russians, there's a reason you don't have a seat at the table.
Do you think the Europeans, the Germans, the French and the Brits are enough to scare the Russians? Or
They could be if they wanted to be.
you've been in town for a few days now. We're here at this this conference, a sort of transatlantic flavour to this thing. It's a needy phrase and we use it all the time and I hate it, but what is the state of the special relationship? As a sort of a man born in Britain yourself, how does it look from where you're sitting? Other than a bit needy.
It looks fine. I mean, I think every time I come to Europe, I see so much anxiety, and we just don't feel the same anxiety back home.
You don't think about us at all?
We do, but like, you know, friends have to talk very, very blandly with each other. And
well, J.D. Vance didn't speak blandly about the Europeans, did he?
Well, he did, right? He was right up in your face. Look,
what did you make of that speech?
Well, I mean, look, it had nothing to do with the Munich Security Conference. It was about censorship. You know, he wanted to make his points. He made his points.
Yeah.
I was focused a lot more on what he had actually said the day before, again, about the Ukraine issue and how nothing should be off the table. And I think, look, people, especially in a new administration where we're literally still in the process of hiring people, things are going to be said. You have to take what the White House official stance is, and that official stance remains, nothing goes off the table. But you do have to start negotiations. That was a campaign promise. I do think it's necessary given where we're at in this particular war. I don't see a pathway forward where Ukraine can handle this from just a human perspective. And you have to at least try this avenue. You can't, now we shouldn't you shouldn't make a win for Putin here.
Yeah.
You can't create a situation where there's a win.
I think that's what's baffling people at the moment.
Yeah, but
what was the sacrifice for 3 years?
Well, sure, but what I tell Europeans is if you don't like that outcome, then be more threatening so that negotiation goes better. You know, whether you're in a bar fight or whether you're in an international conflict, the framework is the same. You have to out crazy the other, which means you have to win in the escalation dominance ladder. So Europeans need to help by being in the background of those negotiations, saying, if this doesn't work, we're going to take further action that you're not going to like. Now, that's a very uncomfortable thing for Europeans to do, but it's very necessary. And so I tell the Germans, for instance, were finger wagging at us a lot in the Munich Security Conference.
We get that a lot as well.
and I was like, if you want a better outcome, then act more aggressively. I realize that's uncomfortable for you. There's a history there. But if you don't do that, if you're always waiting for America to lead you on your own continent, well, it's not going to work.
So Hesketh said, Secretary of Defense said that Europe has to be the primary guarantor of Ukrainian security.
Yes.
How does that, talk me through what that kind of looks like. You say that Europe and French, Germans, Brits need to be more aggressive. I think the Poles and the Baltic states are already pretty punchy themselves.
I think so, yeah.
What do these guarantees look like? Because NATO has really, it's pretty clear that the American, loath to say it, but deep state and political, organisations do not want Ukraine in NATO. That has caused a number of the problems that have got us to this situation in the first place. Without NATO membership, what does it look like? And is it credible to leave it to the Europeans who barely spend 2% of their GDP on
That's up to the Europeans. It could be credible.
Not in the space of 6 months or a year, though, which is if you'd like trying to bring a war to a close.
Again, it's up to the Europeans.
Right.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to say what was just said, that the European guarantee of security involves European forces. And I understand how uncomfortable that is for Europe, but that is the necessary thing.
Even if it's not credible. Surely it's only credible with the United States firepower behind it.
Make it credible.
Right.
Just make it credible.
What would you do? How would you make it credible?
I don't know. It's not my country. Use your forces and make it credible. The devil's in the details, but the broader strategic thinking here is, look, this is what Ukraine is going to demand, first of all. You need a tripwire, is what we would call it.
Yeah.
And you need, this is going to be a key demand of the Ukrainians, I'm sure, which is fine. Well, we're willing to concede certain things, but we need an actual security guarantee, and that security, because they already had a security guarantee some time ago, right, when they gave up their nuclear weapons. So they've learned their lesson. The security guarantee actually means boots on the ground, and that means European boots on the ground. I think that's what the conversation was about. Yes, in Paris
I think
yesterday.
that's where our Prime Minister's Keir Starmer is, but I don't think as we saw, the Germans were
convince them. Convince them.
But
because my point to Europe is, look, if you're gonna lambast the Trump administration for giving up too much, well, then put them in a situation where they have so much more leverage that they don't have to give up much. That's the reality of the situation we're in. Because again, the reality of the situation too is Russia will keep spending human capital like there's no tomorrow because they can, because they simply have more people that they can force into the fight. They have an industrial complex that they can build more artillery rounds than everyone. And they don't care about human life, and they don't care about re-election prospects.
Yeah.
So they have so given those advantages, you have to present different leverage against them, harsher leverage than we have thus far. And so I'm glad that the Europeans are even having that discussion. That was my main message.
So it's taken one speech and 3 weeks of Donald Trump to make it happen. So would you say he's doing a pretty good job so far in livening things up? The president, how is he doing so far in terms of, he's obviously making the Europeans move quicker than they have done in 3 years?
Yes, it's good.
So far so good?
It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
It's very, very necessary. The former strategy, outlined by European leaders and President Biden, which was, as long as it takes or however much it takes, that's not a strategy. Russians laugh at that strategy.
Yeah.
It won't work. You have to escalate to de-escalate. It's very uncomfortable. But look, coming from as a war fighter myself, I know how these things work, and I know how human nature is. And I know, most of all, this is what Europeans and the West in general just has to remember. In the Western world, we think very differently. We think in terms of handshakes and shared values and negotiations. The East doesn't think that way. Putin doesn't think that way. He only thinks in terms of power.
Would you be comfortable with a settlement that results in essentially it looking pretty similar to how it looked in February 2022?
2022, going back to 2022 settlement, that would be pretty damn. I think Ukraine would be very ecstatic about that, to be honest. But I don't know. I don't know how this goes. I think everybody's very worried, and look, everyone should care. I guess worrying and caring are similar emotions, and that's good. But we haven't really started. There's been one meeting, and that meeting was just a relationship building meeting, and just let's hear what they want first. Let's at least get that conversation started. Let's appoint some people to have more conversations. I want to be very clear again. There is no indication, and it's been very clearly stated by the administration that. No indication that Ukraine will be left out of this at all.
But surely this will come down to eventually. I mean, Lavrov and Rubio is one thing, but by all accounts, Putin considers Lavrov a bit of a joke. Anyway, and when he's we're sober enough, get him before lunch, I think is what our diplomats have said. Surely this is going to come down to Donald Trump and Putin in a room together, isn't it? That's how the deal is going to be done. That's how he appears to be operating.
It might. It's a little too soon to tell. There'll be a visit, very high-level conversations. Again, I think the way President Trump operates is going to be more in relationship building on that. And he's deft, in this sense. He's more clever than I think people give him credit for.
Yeah.
And I think we should be thankful for the paradigm shift that has occurred. I want you to imagine a different scenario where Kamala Harris was elected president.
Well, it'd just be
you'd be on the same path of too little, too late all the time.
President Trump's got a funny idea of sovereignty, though, isn't he? Greenland, where he wants to put troops. He wants to annex Gaza and turn it into a resort. The Panama Canal. Is it just sovereignty for the big guy? Talk me through his sort of logic there. Does that not slightly jar with you?
Which one? let's stick to one of them.
Put them all together.
I'm not sure how serious this is about any. Again, in every one of those cases, saying something and doing, and then.
Do you think people take Donald Trump too seriously when he?
You have to take what he does seriously, and I would understand a lot of the hand wringing if people hadn't seen him in action for 4 years, but we already saw him in action for 4 years. NATO didn't fall apart. That 4 years was built strengthening Ukrainian defenses, not the opposite. Yeah. That 4 years was spent on action. Did he say nice things about Putin that made people mad? Yes. Did he do a lot of things against Russia, more than his predecessor ever had? Oh yeah. We killed a bunch of Russians in Syria, no problem. I mean, we put additional sanctions on Russia. There was a number of things. Back when I was having this argument 5 years ago, it's been a while, but I had 6 things that I would repeat, and it was these were not nothing. I mean,
the biggest expulsion of Russian spies and diplomats after.
Right. I mean, he takes pretty hard actions against Russia. So this is a strategy we should be more optimistic about than pessimistic about. That's what I would tell Europeans right now. And the other thing I tell Europeans is be uncomfortably aggressive, please. it will make the outcome of this better for Ukraine.
How do you think our Prime Minister, who's not, he's not known for his flair or his hard man image, he looks pretty silly when he dresses up in camo. What would be your advice to him when he's out there in the White House next week with Trump?
I don't know.
I
don't know your domestic politics well enough to even know your Prime Minister that well or how he operates. But how do you deal with Trump?
Yeah.
Look, he's a regular guy, and you can talk to him. Just be honest and blunt, and that's it. I mean, there's no mystery surrounding Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He is the person you see on the outside. It's very similar to the person you see on the inside. You can have a conversation with him. He will reason with you. He will debate with you. He will have a real conversation with you. It will be very different than what you ever had with President Biden, where his advisors are answering questions for him.
And he's reading off his little piece of paper.
Yeah.
How, we're here at the, obviously, let's talk, finally, just talk, broaden it out a little bit. The future of the West is obviously something that J.D. Vance touched on in Munich. Obviously, this sort of conference is looking at where we're going as the West. What's been your sort of main takeaway from the last couple of days here?
Well, it's largely a cultural conversation,
Yeah.
right, about what Western values are, and it's sort of the need to remember, I suppose, what the foundations of the West are.
Back to basics, sort of thing.
What makes the West successful in the first place, and I haven't had a chance to see every speaker here at the conference because I'm being pulled in 1,000 different directions. So I plan on looking at a lot of them later online. But that's the goal. The goal is to recall what the foundations of Western civilization are. Where do our values come from? Where do we even get the term morality, right? Or do we believe in this moral relativism that is, I think, overtaken a lot of what we would call the woke left, for instance? Or do we believe in more of an absolute truth, right? That comes from God. And coming from the U.S., I give this talk all the time about how we created our laws, or how we came to understand why our laws are just in the first place. In the House of Representatives, we have the 23 lawgivers up in profile up on the ceiling there. We have portraits, and they're from all over history. Some are British.
Yeah.
Some of our founders. Others are Roman, right? They're from everywhere. Who has contributed to our modern notion of law? But in the middle is Moses. And Moses looks straight down. Moses is the only portrait that's not in profile. It's the one that looks straight down. Looks straight down at the Speaker of the House. And then, of course, above the chair of the Speaker of the House says, "In God we trust." So there's something meaningful there. And the meaning is simply that this is the first lawgiver, the first absolute truth. And from there, we built Western civilization. A lot of this conference is about that.
Yeah. And all is not lost yet, then.
No, not
looks
all
like
is
it
lost.
looks like it had a bit of a wobble for the last sort of 10 years.
Yeah, there's been some funny things going on recently,
Yeah.
and we should fight those, and we should talk about those. I'm not nearly as pessimistic about the West as maybe some are. I always tell people, look, if you're catastrophizing a little bit, maybe just get offline for a little while. Go out and talk to some regular people. Yeah, just get offline, talk to some regular people. At least I give this. I say this in America, at least. I don't know what it's like here.
That's pretty bad, isn't it?
But I say, look, get offline, just go talk to some regular people. You might find that most people are still normal.
Do you think that's the mistake people are making with Trump as well? Just the hysteria that people have lathered themselves into from America through to the Germans and
you mean like Trump derangement syndrome?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean,
what's the cure? What is the cure?
Because again, I'm like, hey, look, you have 4 years. Were things really bad over that 4 years? Doesn't seem like it. We prospered. It was good.
He got re-elected as well. The American public didn't think.
Some people think he did, right? But the reason he didn't get re-elected, honestly, I think is because of COVID.
Yeah.
And that's something that's out of our control. And if anything, that should have realigned the West towards what our true problem is, which is the Chinese Communist Party lying about COVID and allowing it to spread to the world. Let's not forget.
Still lying about it now, yeah.
Still lying about it. Let's not forget they canceled domestic flights very early on before we even knew what COVID was. Isn't that funny? They canceled domestic flights but let international flights keep going. But they're not 10 feet tall either. We've got us and Europe and the Western Hemisphere in general, and there's going to be a refocus on from the American perspective towards our own hemisphere as well. And I think that's very necessary because that's part of the West. You know, and I grew up in Latin America. I have an affinity for Latin America. You said I was born in, like you said, in the UK, but I actually have no recollection of that. I was just, I'm an oil and gas family from Houston.
That's why you were in Aberdeen.
You were living in Aberdeen at the time. So I never got, I'm no citizen. I can never be King of Scotland, which is very frustrating to me.
Could you run for president because you weren't born in the United States?
Yes, because I was born I was born a U.S. citizen.
Are you gonna? How do you feel about that? Is that a? You've been thinking about that?
People have asked me, so I've had to research the question. But the politics is tiring as it is. But Ted Cruz was not born in the United States.
Right.
John McCain wasn't born in the United States.
Right.
Anyway. No, it doesn't affect it. I was never a UK citizen. Sorry. So I can't become King of Scotland.
There's no vacancy on that.
Yeah, I don't think there's not a lot of conservatives over there. Last I checked.
There's a few. Definitely a few. Congressman, thank you for joining us. Thanks.
You're welcome.